Hello and welcome back to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Now, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's Pakistan has called for a UN investigation into human rights violations in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India is using a bogey of terror to divert the world's attention. More in this report.
India's strict curfew and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir has now entered its 37th day. Pakistan says the world must not remain indifferent to the tragedy that is unfolding in the occupied valley. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the Kashmir dispute can't be resolved bilaterally. He urged the UN to play its role to end the conflict.
They have gone that far that I do not see any hope of a bilateral engagement in the foreseeable future. The world community, the international organizations will have to. The UN Security Council will have to play a role. It's a question of peace and security of South Asia. Two nuclear armed states face to face, eyeball to eyeball. Will the world wake up? And when will they wake up?
Earlier, addressing a session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, he warns a genocide could be looming in the occupied territory.
I shudder to mention the word genocide here, but I must. With respect to the Genocide Convention, the Kashmiri people in the occupied territory as a national, ethnic, racial and religious group of people face grave threats to their lives, way of living and livelihoods from a murderous, misogynistic and xenophobic regime.
Meeting UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Pakistan's ambassador Maliha Lodi said a humanitarian crisis is raging in the occupied valley. Pakistan is expected to present a resolution to the Council for consideration by the end of the session on September the 27th.
Diplomatic sources say India is planning another false flag operation inside its territory before the UN General Assembly session later this month. The Indian Army claims to have captured abandoned boats from the disputed region of Sir Creek. The Indian Southern Army Commander Lieutenant General S.K. Saini said security measures are being taken. Diplomatic sources said India is spreading false news to divert the world's attention from gross human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. After the story surfaced, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi expressed concerns that India may stage a false flag operation to justify an attack on Pakistan.
India is acting irresponsibly. They're being belligerent. And if there is a false flag operation, which we fear, and they use it as a pretext and carry out some misadventure against Pakistan, we will respond.
Well, for more on this, we're joined by Lieutenant General Ajaz Ewan. Ajaz, sir, thank you so much for joining us here on Indus News. Now, you've been hearing the reports from the Foreign Minister and you've been reading, obviously, the media. You've seen the atrocities in Kashmir. What steps can be taken to stop India from a misadventure ahead of the UN General Assembly session later this month? I think we're having some technical difficulties there. General Ajaz Ewan, sir, are you there? Well, it seems like we've lost our guest, and as soon as we get him back with our live link up, we will come back to that story. Now, US President Donald Trump has again to help Pakistan and India resolve the conflict over occupied Kashmir. Pakistan has welcomed Trump's mediation offer. India has repeatedly rejected any third-party mediation over the Kashmir dispute. Talking to media at the White House, President Trump said he has a good relationship with both countries. He said tensions between Pakistan and India have persisted since New Delhi unilaterally revoked occupied Kashmir's special status.
Having a conflict over Kashmir, as you know, I get along with both countries very well. I'm willing to help them if they want. They know that that is out there.
Okay, well, now we can go back live to Lieutenant General Ajaz Ewan. Welcome to Indus News, sir. So we were talking about India. What steps can Pakistan take to avert any false flag operations that India may have planned for Kashmir?
Well, thank you very much. Pakistan, I think, need not take any step to avoid a false flag operation or to avert a false flag operation, because we have done whatever is possible within our country, and we are bloody sure that we are not involving in ourselves in the Kashmir issue. It's an indigenous struggle for their right of plebiscite that the United Nations gives them. So there is no doubt that India is trying to externalize for the last 2 decades that this struggle is abetted by Pakistan, is supported by Pakistan, and it's not indigenous. But they cannot deface this whole issue, because we all understand that there is a curfew for the last 36 days in Kashmir. The status has been altered. The UN resolutions and bilateral mechanism has been thrown out of the window. So if the people of Kashmir, they respond to these atrocities where over 70,000 people have been killed, women are being raped, the children are being blinded with the use of pellet guns. So there is expected that there will be a response from the people of Kashmir. So if they try to put it on Pakistan, well, Pakistan needs to respond to it, and it will respond to it if there is any misadventure, as said by the Foreign Minister of Pakistan.
Lieutenant General Ijaz, thank you so much. But you mentioned pellet guns, and I wanted to bring this up because Foreign Minister Shahmood Qureshi, he urged the UN Council today to stop the use of pellet guns. How damaging is this? How violent are the use of these pellet guns in occupied Kashmir?
First of all, you do not use it against the humans, because it is affecting the eyesight of the people. There are over 800 people who have lost the eyesight because of the use of this brutal weapon. But India somehow is such an extremist regime in office today that they have used cluster bomb across line of control, which is internationally a banned weapon, and its use is prohibited even in the battlefield. So they are using it against unarmed civilians across the line of control. And in Kashmir, they are using pellet guns against their own people in the state. So if this is the attitude, if this is what they are doing to the people who are demanding their right of self-determination, I think international community needs to attend to this issue and stop India from using such tactics.
Major General Ijaz Ewan Saab, thank you very much for joining us here on Indus News. Now we're joined by Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib. Sir, I wanted to put the question to you. How has India used such false flag operations for its aggressive designs in the past when it comes to Kashmir and between Pakistan?
It has been quite some time now, India, in support of their foreign policy, they have been arranging false flag operations. They have been creating the impression as if Pakistan is a country which is sponsoring terrorism. The main foreign policy objective was to get Pakistan isolated on one hand, and also to portray Pakistan as a country sponsoring terrorism. So because of such policies that they have been arranging various false flag operations, and they have been meeting fair enough of success in this field, because Pakistan never tried to counter the Indian narrative, never tried. We just said that we are not involved, please give us any proof, but we have never tried to prove that India has been telling lies, and in spite of the fact that we had many proofs available with us where India has been sponsoring terrorism in Pakistan, like Al-Qoshan and Hassan statements, etc. But still, I think that diplomacy has been very timid. And because of that, India has been quite successful. So they have been arranging these things. First of all, they did one Pathankot, then they came out to Uri, and then Pulwama. And ultimately, Pulwama was the culminating point where the international community was fully convinced that Pakistan will not leave this kind of trend, so they allowed India to run over Pakistan. They said that India has the right to retaliate, so India finally retaliated. And it is altogether a different thing that Pakistan gave a good military response, and because of that, India could not succeed in their design. But the fact remains that they were able to convince the international community that Pakistan is aggressor, Pakistan has been indulging in acts of terrorism, and that is why the international community decided to or decided to side with India. Not having success in various this kind of incidents, India would definitely like to do similar trick with Pakistan once again. But this time, I think Pakistan is alive of the tactics, and we have been raising the alarm. We have been telling the international community that they are looking for some kind of opportunity to conduct a false flag operation and thereby find an excuse to involve Pakistan in a limited war on one of the fronts. At this moment, this is very important for India because they would like to take away the international attention from Kashmir. They would like to divert the international attention towards the hostilities on the border, because the impression conveyed to the international community will be that the two nuclear powers, they are entering into a war, and war-like situation is developing. And the international community may start running around to create a situation where the two countries are separated and the war is prevented. So that way, they would like to divert the attention from the human rights violations that they are indulging in Kashmir. So it will be just a sideshow or let's say part of the policy to divert the international attention. So that way, Pakistan should, I think we must have aggressive diplomacy whereby we should make the international community cognizant of the thing that this has been the tactics India has been using. Our Prime Minister earlier said that we are not going to initiate war, so once again we may say so, but we should also tell the international community that India is trying to find an excuse to initiate hostilities, and Pakistan is definitely not for this, and we want a peaceful solution, and peacefully we want to address the international community to come forward and force India to lift curfew and restore the human rights of the people in Kashmir. So I think it has to be a proactive diplomacy where the Indian designs are brought in the open, and the international community should be then convinced that India will indulge, so India will have to be then advised not to indulge in such things by the international community. So I think it will be active diplomacy which will be able to prevent such incidents when Pakistan knows that this can happen. So I think we should be all out to convince the international community to bring on pressure to India so that they do not indulge in this kind of hostile arrangement.
Lieutenant General, you mentioned diplomacy, and Pakistan has been taking the diplomatic approach, and it's openly said that we do not want war. India have not done this. You mentioned tactics by India and false flag operations. How do you think they're going to go about doing this with these tactics or false flag operations, Lieutenant General?
One has to understand the whole arrangement which they have worked out. First of all, when Pakistan tried to stop the tribal people from tribal areas to go to Afghanistan because we were supporting the American designs, and we didn't want that the Pakistani people from our tribal areas to cross over to Afghanistan. Then we prevented them, and they thought that we have started siding with the Americans. So they took their own way and ultimately fell into the hands of PRO and started fighting against Pakistan. So that was the time when our people, they started going to Afghanistan because many of them, they tried to fight against the Americans there. And many of them, they were captured and put into Bagram jail and many other places in Afghanistan. From there, certain people were taken away by the Indians, and with the help of CIA and MI6. And they have a number of people with them which they have been using occasionally. They are Pakistanis naturally. So when they are used, they are killed there. And ultimately, some link is taken out, and then it is told to the international community that these are the Pakistanis and they have indulged in this kind of act of terrorism. So it's all, well-worked out arrangement. They carry out such incidents in such a realistic manner that usually the people do not doubt, because they send out the intelligence reports also to their own people on the, let's say, on Pathankot base, for example. They had already informed a day earlier that an attack of this type can take place, so people should be alert and such like things. So just to create reality, many intelligence agencies, they do such like things, and Indian intelligence has also been doing. But unfortunately, when we conducted the detailed inquiry into the Pathankot incident, at that time we came to know about all these issues and the arrangement which the Indians had undertaken to portray Pakistan as a terror-sponsoring country. But our government never took a stand. At that time, during our investigation, we came to know that another incident is going to take place in Indian Gujarat. So at that time, we just learned that there will be 10 people who will be attacking in Gujarat, and 6 of them, we just came to know about the 6 names, and remaining 4 were not traceable, we didn't know. But we conveyed this information to Ajit Doval, our National Security Advisor, Nasser Janjua. He informed on telephone that there is another attack going to take place in Gujarat. 10 people will participate, and these are the 6 names. They thanked us, but then the government never propagated this issue. But we told them on telephone that, look, if we were involved in anything, we won't tell you such like incidents. And at the same time, we told them that we are informing you so that once the incident takes place, you may not start blaming us. So that was prevented, but prevented in a way that the Indians already knew this thing, and then they came to know that the cat has gone out of the bag, so they never came up with any protest or anything. After all, we gave these 6 names. They must have captured all these people, but then captured because they were already under their control, so there was no protest from their side.
Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, thank you very much for joining us here on Indus News. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world after this short break. Hello and welcome back. Now, Indian students have gathered in New Delhi to protest the illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir. Hundreds of people called on India to lift its curfew as they took part in the demonstrations. The protesters held placards and marked their fingers red to express solidarity with the Kashmiris. India's curfew and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir has now entered its 37th day. 31 people have been killed in a stampede during an Ashura procession in the Iraqi city of Karbala. A walkway collapsed during the procession, causing the deadly stampede. The Iraqi Health Ministry says 100 others were also injured in the accident. Thousands gather every year at Karbala to commemorate the sacrifice of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's grandson, Imam Hussein. Turkey says Washington is stalling the implementation of an agreement to create a safe zone in northern Syria. Ankara and Washington agreed last month to establish the safe zone and to clear the area of Syrian Kurdish YPG fighters. Speaking to the press in Ankara, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said Turkey is ready to clear the region on its own. Çavuşoğlu said so far the US has favored YPG forces over Turkey. He said most of the steps taken to create the buffer zone are cosmetic. Earlier, United States and Turkish forces started joint patrols in northeastern Syria. Meanwhile, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Turkey cannot handle a new wave of migrants from Syria. He said the migrant crisis can only be solved by establishing a terror-free zone inside Syria. The United Nations says it will repatriate hundreds of African refugees held in Libyan detention centres back to Rwanda. A spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Barbara Baloch, said the first group of 500 refugees will be evacuated in the coming weeks. UNHCR officials say the refugees will be airlifted to Rwanda and stay in a transit facility. They say the evacuation will be on a voluntary basis and priority will be given to the most vulnerable. According to the UNHCR, nearly 5,000 people from Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia and Sudan are in Libya's detention centers. US President Donald Trump says he's ramping up the Afghan war after cancelling peace talks with the Taliban. The peace talks were called off after an attack in Kabul that killed an American soldier. President Trump said the US military onslaught on the Taliban is back up at its fiercest in a decade. But Trump said he's still thinking about a drawdown of the 14,000 US soldiers in the country. Trump has reiterated that peace talks cannot continue after the insurgents claim responsibility for last week's attack.
When I heard, very simply, that they killed one of our soldiers and 12 other innocent people, I said, there's no way I'm meeting on that basis. There's no way I'm meeting. They did a mistake. And by the way, they are telling people they made a big mistake.
Now, in Brexit, incoming EU chief Ursula von der Leyen says the bloc is ready for a no-deal Brexit, but such a move will not benefit anyone. She said this while speaking at a ceremony to unveil the new European Commission team. Von der Leyen said leaving without an agreement will be more difficult than an orderly Brexit. The incoming chief said she wants the bloc's Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier to continue. Leyen will replace Commissioner President Jean-Claude Juncker on the 1st of November. She named the most gender-diverse executive team in EU history, with 13 women and 14 men. But there is no nominee from the UK, as Brexit is scheduled for the 31st of October. Now, British Parliament has been officially suspended for 5 weeks. Lawmakers created a ruckus in the Parliament after Prime Minister Boris Johnson's call for snap elections was rejected a second time. Parliament will now reopen on the 14th of October. Opposition lawmakers held signs reading "silenced" and yelled "shames on you," unruly Conservatives. Queen Elizabeth has approved legislation against a no-deal Brexit. But Prime Minister Johnson says he will not delay Brexit any further and will strive to get an agreement done with the EU. Now, in other news, North Korea has launched 2 unidentified projectiles hours after it offered to resume nuclear talks with the United States. South Korea's military says the missiles were launched from South Pyongyang province towards the East Sea. Seoul says its military is monitoring the situation and is ready to stop any acts that can escalate tensions. Today's tests are the 8th such launch since July. Earlier, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Pyongyang has not violated any commitments to Washington regarding weapons testing. But meanwhile, North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Cho Sun-hui said a meeting can be held with the United States officials to resume talks. Well, I'll be back with more news from around the world after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Now, forest fires raging across Indonesia have carried thick clouds of smoke across the whole of Southeast Asia. The toxic smog has led to the closure of hundreds of schools across the region. More in this report.
Huge fires are raging across vast swathes of Indonesia's rainforest. Massive jungle areas in Sumatra and the Borneo Islands are on fire. Thousands of firefighters are struggling to extinguish the flames. Jungle fires are frequently started to clear land for crops. The smoke has spread to other countries, including Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore and Thailand.
The size of the burnt area is about 5 hectares. The challenges are the lack of water sources and the lack of personnel.
Experts believe the forest fires could have a serious impact on the global climate. Residents are complaining of respiratory problems with itchy and sore eyes.
Yes, it's a bit difficult because here the air is dirty.
Indonesian environmentalists have called for a crackdown against burning forests for land clearance. Malaysia says it is planning to carry out cloud seeding to induce rain and clear the air.
Now, it's not only Indonesia that's dealing with fire, as hundreds of Australians have fled their homes as 140 bushfires ravaged parts of Queensland and New South Wales. Queensland Police Commissioner Katrina Carroll said at least 8 of the fires are suspicious and will be investigated. Queensland's acting Premier Jackie Trad said over 400 people are present at the evacuation shelters. She said no deaths have been reported as of yet.
Got more than 400 people currently in evacuation centres, and unfortunately we will not be able to provide advice to them to return back to their homes until proper safety assessments have been done.
The World Health Organization says a person commits suicide every 40 seconds across the world. A report has termed suicide a global public health issue. More in this report.
More people die by suicide every year than in war or by homicide. A report by the World Health Organization says nearly 800,000 people die by suicide worldwide every year. It has specified hanging, poisoning, and shooting as the most common suicide methods.
So we see that there are an estimated 800,000 deaths from suicide in the world every year. And this translates to about 1 death every 40 seconds globally. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among the age group of 15 to 29-year-olds.
The report found that nearly 3 times as many men as women die by suicide in wealthy countries, while the rates are equal in low and middle-income countries. WHO has called for action to reduce access to suicide means, including pesticides and firearms.
When we think about access to means, we know that in the region of Americas, access to firearms and guns is an important means of suicide. And basically, we would need to look, similarly to the pesticides, whether we can arrive at the reduction of the access to such means of suicide.
Global suicide rates have fallen in recent years, but the decline is inconsistent. WHO has urged governments to adopt suicide prevention plans to help people cope with stress.
Now, if you've ever wanted to sail around the world but think you're too old, then you may want to think again, as Jean Socrates has become the oldest person ever to sail around the world solo. She left Victoria back in October 2018. More in this report.
A 77-year-old British woman sailed into the history books and made a name for herself. She navigated the 36-foot boat into Victoria's Ogden Point in British Columbia, Canada. On her non-stop voyage, she was unassisted and spent more than 330 days alone at sea. Socrates has made several tries since 2016 to become the oldest person to navigate the globe alone. She had to abandon each try because of rough seas, boat damage, and sometimes a personal injury.
This as one of the greatest voyages of all times. A 77-year-old woman who's battled unbelievable hardships on this trip.
Hundreds of well-wishers waited for Socrates at the breakwaters of Victoria. Her close friend and fellow sailing buff Steve Illman welcomed her back at the Ogden Point. Illman said the radar dish, mainsail, and the backup sail on Socrates' boat sustained damage during her voyage.
She's looking forward to having a very long hot bath and then eating a lovely meal and a nice glass of wine. Luckily, the Fairmont Empress Hotel has graciously donated that wish to her.
The septuagenarian sailor did not immediately talk to the media, but waved and smiled at her well-wishers.
Now, it's been more than 30 years since Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale. The much-anticipated sequel has now been released. Fans flocked to Waterstone's flagship bookstore in central London for a midnight reading by Atwood herself. More in this report.
Londoners were transported to Margaret Atwood's fictional estate of Gilead. It was to celebrate the launch of the Testaments. It is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, a terrifying, misogynistic dystopia set in the US in the near future. Turned into a major television series, the book has become a feminist rallying point for the Me Too generation.
I mean, how many years now is it? I don't know, 40 years, 30 years on. And actually, the world in some ways is becoming a worse place for women, and particularly in the United States. And so this is very current and very relevant and very necessary.
Handmaids donning iconic red cloaks and white headpieces march through central London. The hats and cloaks have become a symbol of feminist struggles, but they resonate with other themes too.
I didn't think of it as feminist fiction. I just thought of it as one of the best pieces of science fiction that I'd read, although at the time it seemed like it was describing a future that was obviously impossible because we were all much too sensible ever to get to that place.
The show has boosted sales of the novel, which has shifted 8 million copies worldwide in English alone. It has already been nominated for the 2019 Booker Prize, one of the English-speaking world's most prestigious literary awards.
Now in business news, the European Union has vowed to boost Cuba's economy. EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said the bloc will also counter a wave of lawsuits against European firms. Meeting Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel, EU top diplomat Mogherini said the bloc rejects the US activation of the Helms-Burton Law. The 1996 law allows Cuban Americans to recover damages from companies that do business with the Cuban state. The provision had been waived by every former US president to avoid conflicts with European companies active inside Cuba. The EU official said the bloc's investment will also help European companies consolidate their foothold on the island. US President Donald Trump has tightened sanctions against Havana over rights violations and support for Venezuela's leftist regime. Now, Jack Ma, the chairman of China's e-commerce giant Alibaba, has stepped down. In an already announced transition, company's current CEO Daniel Zhang will replace him as executive chairman. Jack Ma co-founded Alibaba in 1999, making it one of the biggest online firms in the world. Ma will stay on the company's board until his current term expires in 2020. Alibaba is now valued at $480 billion, making Jack Ma one of the richest men in China. He's also the first founder among a generation of prominent Chinese internet entrepreneurs to step down from his company. Chinese company Huawei has dropped a lawsuit against the US government. The Chinese telecom giant took the move after Washington released its telecommunications equipment. Huawei had sued the US Commerce Department and other government agencies for seizing its equipment in 2017. The company said it was informed by the US government that no export license was required to ship the gear back to China. Washington claims that Huawei equipment is a national security risk as it could be used to spy on Americans. Huawei has repeatedly denied the US allegations. Well, it's 32 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but I'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Bye-bye.